Morning all. Boris Johnson is, well, unlikely to be waking up with a clear head this morning, with the continuing furore over lockdown-breaking parties at number 10. The latest allegations centre on so-called wine time Fridays, regular Downing Street drinking sessions held throughout the pandemic. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, is renewing his calls for the Prime Minister to resign, claiming that he's guilty of deceit and deception. Our chief political correspondent, John Craig, reports.
Wine Time Fridays, the latest allegation of drinking inside 10 Downing Street. Regularly witnessed during the pandemic, it's claimed by Boris Johnson. The Daily Mirror reports that the Prime Minister encouraged staff to let off steam, despite lockdown rules. And the regular events were so popular that staff bought a fridge to keep wine and beer cool. Downing Street has not denied the latest allegations, which follow the PM being forced to apologise to the Queen over parties on the eve of Prince Philip's funeral, when she was forced to mourn alone. Number 10 says the ongoing Whitehall investigation will look into the nature of gatherings, who attended, where they happened, their purpose and whether they obeyed the rules. But today, Sir Keir Starmer, in a major speech, will turn up the heat on the PM on Downing Street drinking, after saying he should be offering Buckingham Palace's resignation as well as an apology. Rather than concentrating on getting through the pandemic and bringing down waiting lists, this self-indulgent Tory party is instead having a fight about a leader who they should have known from the start is not fit for office, the Labour leader will say.
Everybody now sees the Prime Minister as a liar who has tried to cheat his way out and break the rules and has set the culture within number 10 that has told other staff and other people that they can carry on as normal.
Amid all the drinking allegations, some cabinet ministers are reported to be claiming privately that the PM is in the last chance saloon. The Financial Times quotes one long-time supporter lamenting, "He's done, it's over." The Prime Minister, we're told, is spending the weekend here in Downing Street rather than going to Chequers as usual because a member of his family has tested positive for COVID. His MPs, meanwhile, are mostly back in their constituencies, getting the verdict of voters and disgruntled Tory activists on the latest lurid allegations of partying here. Despite professing her loyalty, it's claimed the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss is wooing Tory MPs, preparing for a leadership bid. So too, according to MPs, is the Chancellor Rishi Sunak, who controversially visited Devon on the day of the PM's Commons apology. In Mr Sunak's North Yorkshire constituency, voters back him to succeed Mr Johnson.
Yeah, I'd like to see him gone. I'd like to see Rishi as the Prime Minister, because I think we can trust him. Simple as.
I'm really disappointed in everything that's come out. I feel that everybody has really worked hard to try and uphold all the guidance and that we've been really let down.
The Prime Minister, meanwhile, is plotting a fight back, including a clear-out of officials tainted by the partying scandal and axing Plan B rules such as COVID passports, masks and working from home. He's calling his fight back Operation Save Big Dog. He hopes it will bring his critics to heel and save his premiership. John Craig, Sky News.
So could the party be over for Boris Johnson? See what I did there? Well, let's get the opinion of Joe Twyman. He's the director and co-founder of Deltapol. Joe, really good to see you this morning. Look, I absolutely hate the phrase cutting through, you know, the idea that people need to know about a story for it to be a story. But what is the evidence, if there is indeed any evidence, that these allegations of parties are actually having an effect on the way the public is viewing Boris Johnson and his administration?
Well, in the world of polling, we tend to look at long-term trends rather than short-term fluctuations. And the impact of these latest stories has been that the long-term trend, the decline of the Conservative Party and the increase of the Labour Party lead, that's accelerated in light of these most recent revelations. And this is likely to be the start of a difficult weekend for the Conservatives in terms of polling results that are to be published in the papers. It's certainly not a good situation situation at the moment. And so in the short term, it's definitely cutting through. The Conservatives are below 30% for the first time really since Boris Johnson has become Prime Minister. Labour have a double-digit lead, and so it's really a bad position for them, for the Conservatives at the moment. The question is, of course, will this last? Because it's all very well cutting through, and in the artificial construction of a survey instrument, people saying, oh, well, if there were a general election tomorrow, I would vote Labour. But there isn't a general election tomorrow. And the real question for all the parties is where will they be, not just next week, but next month and next year? And what this series of stories has done to the Conservatives is firstly prevented them from moving on and starting any kind of fight back, but also it appears to have led to a cumulative narrative forming that many people are starting to come on board with, and that is the idea that the government doesn't play by its own rules, doesn't act fairly, and in many cases can't be trusted. And that, rather than individual stories, could be a far more damaging thing to shake off longer term.
Just though in terms of where perhaps Boris Johnson is most feeling the pressure, I mean, look, one of the reasons why he has been so impervious to criticism since 2019, is the size of the majority. And a large chunk of that majority came from seats which were not necessarily Conservative traditional seats. Do we think that the effect is being most felt amongst those perhaps newer Conservative voters, or is it in the heartlands?
Well, in Delta Poll's work at the end of last year, we found that the problem was more acute in those seats that the Conservatives gained at the last election than it was in those seats that they held. And many of those seats will be, of course, traditional Labour heartlands, the so-called Red Wall. And those are the seats that Boris Johnson won to give him this majority. And if he can't hold on to those come the next election, then it will be very difficult for him to achieve a majority. And it's worth pointing out, of course, that the Labour Party don't need to win a majority of the seats in order to get into Parliament. The way that the electoral arithmetic is likely to work means they just need to prevent the Conservatives getting a majority in order to rule through some sort of coalition and get the keys to Downing Street.
OK, then, Joe, simple question for you. Who's going to be the next Prime Minister, then? If we just, for a second, hypothesise that this might prove fatal, that the Tories do get the requisite number of letters to the chairman of the 1922 committee, if there is a leadership contest, who fills number 10 next?
Well, at the moment, Liz Truss is polling very well with Conservative members. Rishi Sunak does very well with the general public, but neither of them are actually particularly well known, nor have they been put up to the kind of scrutiny that you would expect a Conservative candidate to be subjected to. So I imagine we're looking at maybe one of those two, or perhaps someone who hasn't been in the limelight so much. Perhaps Michael Gove might be good for an outside bet.
Not so sure about that one. Just a final point, though, Joe, just in terms of an expectation that there might be an election. I mean, do the British public feel that things are starting to gather ahead of steam? I have to say, I perhaps don't.
I don't think a general election is particularly likely because there doesn't need to be one. We've done away with the Fixed Term Parliament Act, and there doesn't need to be one for another couple of years. And I imagine the Conservatives, now that they have the power to call that election when they want to, will do it at the time that is best for them. So I can't see a general election. A leadership election, even that, I think, is being overhyped at the moment. I mean, understandably, given all MPs want to be Prime Minister, but I think we've got perhaps some way to go on that as well.
Yeah, and some MPs more than others. Joe Twyman, really good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks.
Meanwhile, let's just reflect on the latest daily COVID data. Now, it shows almost 100,000 new cases of coronavirus across the UK. That's the lowest for 3 months. Another 270 deaths, taking the number of deaths within 28 days of a positive test to 151,612. And Sky News has launched a new NHS COVID tracker where you can find out just how your local trust is doing. This thing next to my head is a QR code. If you scan it on your phone, it will take you directly to the NHS tracker. There, pop in a postcode, And you'll find relevant data, including hospital admissions, the number of beds in use and waiting times. A little later this morning, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, giving a speech in which he will set out his plans to reform the NHS. You can watch that here live on Sky News just after 10 a.m. He should be in the final stages of preparation to defend his title in the Australian Open, which of course begins on Monday. Instead, Novak Djokovic is back in detention, awaiting a court hearing that will decide if he'll be deported. Our correspondent Shingi Marariki has been following the story. Morning again, Shingi. Is this it? Is this the final decision? Will we finally work out whether or not Novak Djokovic is getting kicked out of Australia or not?
It looks like there'll be a decision, but if the decision goes the way of Djokovic, the Australian government can actually still decide to revoke his visa for a third time. But as it stands tomorrow, we know that Novak Djokovic has an appeal hearing after having his visa revoked for a second time. That takes place at 9:30 a.m. tomorrow morning in Australia, which is about 10:30 p.m. tonight here. And this time the Australian government are using different grounds to revoke his visa. They're saying that because he is a high-profile, unvaccinated individual, he could foster more anti-vax sentiment in Australia. Djokovic's lawyers tomorrow morning will say that that is patently irrational and that they are now using completely different grounds to the first time that they detained him for 4 days before he was released on Monday. And of course, with all this legal to and fro happening, Djokovic, unlike his peers, his rivals for the Australian Open title, is thinking about legal proceedings while lots of them are doing their last media duties and their last preparations for the tournament. And time is running out. He was looking to become a 21-time Grand Slam champion, the most decorated male tennis player of all time. But there's a very high chance that he may still either have legal proceedings hanging over his head, or he could be on a plane back to Serbia by Monday evening rather than taken to a tennis court.
Find out. Shingi, for now, thank you. Also making the news this morning, lawyers for Virginia Giuffre, the woman accusing Prince Andrew of sexual assault, have requested permission to interview 2 potential witnesses in the UK. One is a woman who allegedly saw the Duke of York in a nightclub with a young girl. The other, a former assistant to the Prince, whose name appeared in Jeffrey Epstein's Black Book. Meanwhile, the 28th of June has been announced as the sentencing date for Ghislaine Maxwell. The British socialite was convicted last month on sex trafficking charges relating to the recruitment of teenage girls for the paedophile Jeffrey Epstein. The actor Alec Baldwin has handed over his mobile phone to investigators who are looking into the fatal shooting of a cinematographer on a film set last October. Halnya Hutchins was killed when a gun fired a live bullet during a rehearsal for a scene in the Western film Rust. Coast Guards around the UK will mark the 200th anniversary of the service today. Founded in the year 1822, Her Majesty's Coast Guard has 3,500 volunteers and 310 teams nationwide. To mark the milestone, 200 throw lines will be cast out around the country as a symbol of the service's dedication. A senior US official has told Sky News she believes Russia is looking for an excuse to invade Ukraine and is warning of widespread economic and political consequences. But the Undersecretary of State says she doesn't think a week of diplomatic talks between Russia and the West have been entirely fruitless. Victoria Newland has been speaking to our US correspondent, Mark Stone.
Along Europe's eastern flank, the soldiers of the Ukrainian army are digging in. Over the horizon, Russia's military continues to mass. 100,000 soldiers, and a week of diplomacy has delivered nothing but stalemate. Now the Americans say they believe Russia is looking for a reason to invade, and if they can't find one, they'll create one.
Well, this is straight out of the Russian playbook, to try to, through sabotage operations, through false flag operations, through blaming the other guy, to create that pretext, to give an excuse to go in, or to make it look like the Ukrainians were the aggressors, when in fact the first aggression was perhaps even done by Russians against Russians, to blame the Ukrainians. So it's all very dangerous in the way they operate.
Under 3 presidencies, Victoria Newland has had a focus on Ukraine and Russia. She is now Under Secretary of State.
Just put this moment in context for us. How serious is it? How worried are you, and how worried should we be?
Well, Mark, it's extremely worrying. You know, a nation does not deploy 100,000 troops on the border of another nation and put its saboteurs inside the country without some malign and aggressive intent.
Russia insists that all this is part of an exercise. It has dismissed the false flag accusations as nonsense. Its diplomats say the aggressor is NATO, an alliance advancing east that must be countered.
NATO has no gripes with Russia unless Russia is coming for us. We've lived side by side since the end of the Cold War, some 30 years.
Is America prepared to go to war with Russia if it invades Ukraine?
What we are talking about here is helping the Ukrainians to defend themselves and preparing massive consequences, economic and political, for Moscow if it walks away from the diplomatic table and chooses aggression instead. And we all have to do that. We can't allow countries to change international borders by force. We'll have a free-for-all out there in the world.
But President Putin already did that. He did that in Crimea.
He did.
And we know from history that sanctions don't tend to work. So, you know, if they do invade, what then? That question hasn't been answered. What will you, America, do if Russia goes ahead and invades, beyond sanctions?
What we're preparing this time is far more severe and painful for Russia economically in terms of its potential complete economic isolation from the global financial system as well as its political isolation.
The good news is that neither side has ditched the diplomacy just yet. Talks continue at many levels, and soldiers on both sides of the border await orders. Mark Stone, Sky News.
But let's return to those fresh developments in the case being brought against Prince Andrew. Joining us now, the author Nigel Cawthorne, who wrote Prince Andrew, Epstein and the Palace. Nigel, lovely to see you this morning. I wonder if we might just start with the events, of course, of the past 24, 48 hours. We know that he is a proud man. One wonders how he will be feeling having been stripped of all those military patronages.
Well, he's not just a proud man. I think he's probably an angry man now. That as the second the second son, the spare, as it were, you have very little role in life, which were kind of that gap was filled up with all these ceremonial roles that he has, and now has no more. What else has he got to do apart from ride his mother's horses around the Windsor Great Park?
Oh, I mean, it's an entertaining way to spend an afternoon, I'm sure. But in terms of where he goes next, I mean, was there an inevitability to the decision, which we presume was taken at the very top of the House of Windsor, to remove those patronages, to remove or to stop him from using the HRH title? I mean, was there an inevitability that this was the point we would have to end up in?
Well, it's surprising it took so long, because after all, Prince Harry was asked to give up all his military roles and stop using the HRH title already. And as far as I know, he hasn't been charged with any serious offence.
So whether Prince Andrew then, I mean, obviously his prime focus will be on the Virginia Giuffre case, given that the judge at first instance refused to allow him to throw it out. But he must have an eye on where he goes after all of this finally concludes. I mean, this must be the end, though, of him as a public figure.
Well, indeed so. We must afford Prince Andrew, like anyone, the presumption of innocence. However, he has kind of besmirched the monarchy by his very bad choice of friends. I mean, he was very close friends and allies with two convicted sex offenders now, which I think is kind of bad enough as it is without seeing the judgment in this trial.
Yeah, I mean, we can almost put Ghislaine Maxwell to one side in all of this. I mean, as your book reveals, you know, Prince Andrew was very well aware of who Jeffrey Epstein was when he returned to New York, as we discovered, so that he could do the honourable thing and say goodbye. I mean, did the reality of what he was doing during that trip to New York just not register with the man?
Well, plainly not. I mean, you don't go and spend 4 days living in someone's house just to say, goodbye, I'm not going to see you anymore because of what you've done. You could have done that by a telephone call or an email. You didn't have to turn up in person and enjoy the man's hospitality.
I mean, given all of that, and look, I understand as well as anyone, you know, the desire of a parent to look after their child, particularly the second child, but why was this allowed to continue? Surely there was a point that Prince Andrew should have departed public life, and it was long, long ago.
Indeed, it's very clear that Prince Andrew is a man who doesn't take advice. He was advised not to do that disastrous Newsnight interview, which has really sunk his ship.
Nigel Cawthorne, good to see you this morning. Thanks for being with us.
OK, my pleasure.
Now, it's usually the pursuit of teenagers in baggy jeans, but some middle-aged people are now taking up skateboarding. Not me. And a new study has found that it can help to boost happiness and well-being. Sky's Aisha Zahid has been down to a skate park to find out for herself.
Esther decided to give skateboarding a go after everyday life began to feel too stable. 5 years later, and now in her early 50s, it's a decision she hasn't looked back on.
I kind of had a couple of years of feeling a bit purposeless in terms of big life goals being completed and being in a kind of professional situation where one goes to work every day and one comes home. And I think skateboarding just fitted in my life at that time because it offered me something else. It offered me a new challenge. It offered me a chance to learn again. There's a stereotype that skateboarding is about freedom, and it is about freedom for me. But it's also about loads of other things. It's about pushing myself, challenging myself, taking risks, building my strength emotionally and physically.
Esther isn't alone in taking up skateboarding later in life.
Typically, you'd expect to see this place filled out with young people, but more and more older people are getting into skateboarding. Experts say that the activity can provide a real sense of empowerment.
At this skate park in South London, they've welcomed hundreds of new skaters through their doors in the last year.
Done well then. Yeah. With our Monday night beginners nights, that was always just adults only. That was the only criteria, and that opened it up to a huge amount of people. So anyone from the ages of 18 to 50 could come, or as old as they want. And what we found is that those people did start coming, and they started creating their own little communities.
While it may not always feel like the obvious choice for someone older, research suggests that skateboarding not only improves mental well-being, but can also help people navigate personal challenges.
Fundamentally, you've got something that's new, engaging, gives you some exercise, and can plug you into a community. It doesn't solve all your problems, that's for sure, but a lot of people find that it's quite inspiring.
It's hoped that getting on board could give many more like Esther the boost they need. Aisha Zahid, Sky News.
He created The Office, gave us extras, and now he's managing to make grief just a little lighter. Back for a third series, Ricky Gervais' Afterlife has resonated widely during the pandemic. Sky's Claire Gregory caught up with the comedian along with some of the cast to discuss just how the show came together.
I wish I hadn't teased her about there not being an afterlife now. I think she wanted to believe in like heaven and angels and stuff.
In the height of the pandemic in spring 2020, grief was all too close to home, and Ricky Gervais' story of a widower had audiences in tears of sadness and laughter, and went on to become the most watched British comedy programme in the world.
The realer someone is, the better the performance. The more you laugh at the jokes and the more you cry at the sad bits.
Do you want to come over later? No. I haven't even finished.
And like with some of his previous creations, it's hard to know where the character ends and Gervais begins.
I think people have got this idea that Ricky's quite arrogant and a bit like David Brent.
Yeah, and he is. He's exactly like that.
There is a touch. There is a touch.
The main problem with Ricky as a director is that he just finds everything funny. So, like genuinely, it can be a bit. I mean, there'd be scenes we've done in series 2 when I was doing those scenes with Paul Kay. He had to leave the room and be listening to it on cans, and we could still hear him laughing outside the door.
Yeah.
I mean, it was ridiculous.
I ruin most takes.
Yeah. So that's your sort of your greatest flaw, I think, as a director, is that you sabotage your own work.
In the aftermath of the muted and scaled-back Golden Globes last week, Gervais's scathing speeches as host in 2020 now hold a special place in awards history.
He's also the only person who Ben Affleck hasn't been unfaithful to. Please welcome Matt Damon.
The first time I did it, 10 years ago, people were going, why is he saying awful things to these most important people in the world? And the world changed. And by the 5th time, they were going, yeah, go on, give it to him. Yeah. We're sick of them. We're sick of celebrities.
He's a baby.
Yeah, but he's not the one making all the noise, is he? You are.
Yeah, well, to keep him amused, because if he was crying, that would annoy people, wouldn't it?
No, it wouldn't, because he's a baby.
For those missing Gervais's caustic wit, this final series will be welcome and will leave many viewers wondering what's next for him after Afterlife. Claire Gregory, Sky News.
Time for the papers this morning in the company of the anthropologist Mariana Hota and the journalist and author Pete Price. Good to see you again, guys. Pete, to you first. At the front of the Mail, a story about Sir Keir Starmer, and you'll have to forgive me a sense of déjà vu, because I think I've seen this story before somewhere.
Yeah, the story came out, I believe, last year, but they're saying pot, kettle, black. And they're also saying, should the Labour leader demand his own resignation? Do you know what upsets me about this is I think we've only just started on this one. I think we're going to have even more MPs and political leaders from other parties are going to be exposed, because I just find it unreal that somebody's gone past and taken a photograph through the window. Apparently there's about 5 people there, and some of them are eating as well, but the Labour Party have said they haven't broken any laws at all. But it did come out last year, this picture, and I just wonder how many MPs have not broken the law. Do we have everyone resigning because of drinking? Because we'll have no governments left. Or waiting governments. I've been expecting this photo to come out again. I'm surprised at it, but who invented phones on telephones? Cameras on telephones. What is that all about? It's just, you can't go anywhere or do anything. So this is, I think, the start of what's going to happen on the comeback to the Labour against Conservatives.
Pete, I think you're going to have an awful couple of years if you've only just discovered about camera phones. Honestly, they're everywhere these days. But Marianne, take us then to Express. You might want to reflect on the kind of the contrast between Sir Keir Starmer, who's not apologising for this. They say it was a work event, and the front of the Express, where we understand that Downing Street has apologised to Buckingham Palace, although we are still in a little bit of doubt as to what exactly it was they're apologising for.
Yeah, so, I mean, the thing is, Pete, I think if that photograph is the worst that the Mail can find about the leader of the opposition or the opposition party MP's sort of misbehaviour, that he's got a beer in his hand while other people are having dinner and there are 5 other people in the room, I do wonder whether that possibly suggests, and I'm not a member of the Labour Party, I'm not, sort of lobbying on their behalf, but I do wonder whether that suggests that perhaps they had a culture where they were attempting at least to follow the rules a little more carefully than the mighty leaders of our country and the government, who have now got a lead civil service, Sue Gray, investigating 13 alleged parties, and of course this unprecedented apology to Buckingham Palace from Downing Street, not from the Prime Minister personally, but from number 10 Downing Street, because 2 of the parties were held the evening before Prince Philip's funeral. So this is a period of national mourning. This is just hours before we saw our monarch, a queen in her 90s, sitting alone in St George's Chapel, burying her husband on her own. And obviously, that's the Queen. It's such a visible physical, visceral symbol of what everybody has had to give up, even the Queen. And that story of tragedy and isolation and loss and loneliness and struggle is something that many, many millions of people around this country have shared. People have harrowing stories of what they have lost because of sacrifices they've made to keep everybody more safe from COVID. And I think the thing that we have to look at now is not just how many more allegations are going to come out, how many more revelations about the kind of scandalous things that people were getting up to because the rules didn't apply to them. Yeah. I think we have to start looking at what needs to happen now. And Boris Johnson's line has been consistently, we need to wait for the outcome of Sue Gray's investigation. That is very hotly anticipated in the coming days, hopefully this week.
Well, yeah, well, to be fair, she has got an awful lot on her plate now, Marianne. I mean, it does.
Yeah, but we can't wait too long because otherwise it becomes old news. Everyone attempts to shrug it off and say, oh, well, you know, it happened a long time ago. We've got, you know, more important things to worry about. Russia's about to invade Ukraine, all the rest of it. But this really matters because this is about our leaders lying to us.
Pete, take us inside the Times, and a story that I think will resonate with some people in particular because of that meeting between the Health Secretary and an unvaccinated anaesthetist that took place just a few days ago. But perhaps as much as, what, 10% of staff could be on their way to the exit?
Yeah, I saw the story on Sky and I was visibly shocked. We could lose 10% of the health staff. They have to have a jab by the 3rd of February to have the second jab by April, when they could lose their jobs. I really don't understand, and I know some people medically can't have the vaccination, but I really don't understand what is going on. I know a lot of people in the medical profession, they shake their heads in disbelief at the anti-vaxxers within the NHS. We've got enough problems with people who are stressed, who are worked to death, and now we could lose 10% within the NHS. That really is a very frightening situation. But I really don't understand when they talk about the antibodies, I mean, if millions upon millions upon millions of people around the world have all had their jabs, and it seems to be helping us enormously, why can't the NHS staff have the jab? I really can't get my head around this at all, but it's frightening for the staff that are left and in the care workers as well. I don't know what the answer is, but it frightens the life out of me. And when I saw that interview on Sky, I stood back in disbelief.
Yeah, and all at a time, of course, of unprecedented sick leave because of COVID. Marianne, let's go to the front of the Telegraph. And it's an interesting picture. Tell us why we're focusing on Princess Beatrice today.
Yeah, so this is the revelation that the Duke of York, he is no longer Prince Andrew. He can't be His Royal Highness. All those titles have been stripped by the Queen and brought back to, they're going to be kind of given to other members of the royal family. He's going to be facing a civil trial by jury in New York because of the allegations that he had sex with a 17-year-old, multiple occasions. And so the revelation, I guess, is that his daughter Beatrice is probably going to be embroiled in this if it does go to trial, because she'll be called as a witness, not just to corroborate the alibi that he's provided previously, which was that he was having dinner with her in a Pizza Express in Woking rather than having sex with an underage girl one evening, and that he can't sweat, and therefore the allegation that he was a sweaty person, or he couldn't sweat at the time. I don't know if that still continues to be the case for him, allegedly, whether his daughter would have insight into that or not. So it besmirches the monarchy, of course, and it's important that we establish the truth. It might not go to trial. There is the possibility that there would be a settlement out of court. That would probably be financial, but also may well involve some kind of public apology or acceptance or statement that there was wrongdoing. The Duke of York...
that, Marianne. I will believe that when I see it, frankly, on this.
Yeah, he's denied all the charges. So it's a horrible situation for a 33-year-old, for a young woman to be asked to kind of go into public to defend or denounce her father. That's pretty grim.
Pete, this story to round off there, I have to say, is a cracker. Tell us about the poor chap who thought his numbers were in, but instead his numbers up.
14 million he thought he'd won. He was going to buy his mother a house and himself a Ferrari. He put the numbers on the wrong day. How you get it mixed up, I'll never know in a million years, but he got the whole thing was completely wrong. The Euro Millions, and he just got the wrong date. But, oh, I mean, he's the unluckiest lad in Britain. He's the most unluckiest man in the world. How do you live with yourself? He'll have to go and join Boris for a drink, cheer himself up.
Or just pop round to yours and just dip, just go underneath that in that drinks trolley there.
Will you stop going on about my drinks trolley? Now we're going to fall out.
And on that bombshell, Pete, Marianne, we will see, well, we'll at least see you next hour, Marianne. I'm not so sure about Pete at the moment. We'll see you next hour, I hope. Fingers crossed. Still to come on breakfast, appropriately enough, we'll be discussing Wine Time Fridays. Full details of the latest allegations of lockdown-breaking drinking sessions at number 10.